Welcome back to another episode of the Robert Pattinson Career Reflection and Biographical Analysis podcast.
So stupid.
Just kidding, but it does kind of seem that way sometimes. But for real, welcome back to the Stage 18 podcast. And guess what? Movie theaters are back open.
Yeah, going back to the movie theaters was an odd experience. You know, going to the movies is my absolute favorite thing to do. And it was fun, but there was a certain sense of foreboding, sitting there for 2.5 hours surrounded by people.
I'm just hoping the movie theaters can stay open and we can have our pipeline of new movies back. I have a confession though, maybe 40% to 45% of my happiness that theaters are open is for the popcorn. You know, I'm pretty good at making popcorn at home. You know, I do the seeds and the oil on the stove method. You know, sometimes I'll take a stick of butter and put that in the microwave and drip it over the popcorn, but it's never as good. But anyways, this is practically going to be another Robert Pattinson themed episode. First on the list is the new Batman trailer. It's called The Batman. Cody, did this trailer make you excited for another Batman movie?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always going to be excited for a new Batman movie. Anything they put out, they have my money already. But this looks good. I breathed a sigh of relief when it was over.
Yeah, for me, just watching Robert Pattinson hand out knuckle sandwiches was pretty sweet.
Matt Reeves clearly learned his lesson from Batfleck's action sequences in the Zack Snyder movies. The action in this trailer, it looked raw and brutal, which is Batman's fighting style. You know, he pulls no punches. And Matt Reeves said this is going to be a detective story more than an action film. We didn't see much of that in the trailer, so I am looking forward to that aspect.
Yeah, I'm fine with Matt Reeves as the director. You know, he did the recent Planet of the Apes movies. It's nice to know that a director with a good track record is taking the reins of a franchise like this.
And those Apes movies are pretty good, but I don't love them. They're kind of slow and they stuck to the action movie formula a bit too much. I've also seen Let Me In, which is Matt Reeves' other film, but that was worse than the original Let the Right One In. So I'm going in with medium expectations, and I'm hoping to be pleasantly surprised.
Hey, I'm just glad it's not some first-time director. I feel like that never works when it's a big franchise movie. And yeah, most of all, you mentioned him before, I'm just relieved that Zack Snyder isn't directing it. So, how do you think Robert Pattinson looks as the new Batman? How do you think the character of Batman comes across?
I think he looks pretty good. The mask is a little bit too wide in the face area. Like, you see too much of his cheek, in my opinion. Maybe it will work when we see the, final film. But I think he looks pretty good. You know, he's not ripped for sure. We have a skinny Batman this time around. But Michael Keaton wasn't really ripped either. So that worked.
Yeah, Ben Affleck was pretty jacked. He was fine as Batman. He wasn't terrible, but he was nothing to write home about. I honestly think with Pattinson, we might have another baller status Batman like Christian Bale.
And the voice sounded good.
I'm vengeance. How am I part of it?
It wasn't synthesized like Batfleck's, and it wasn't ridiculous like Bale's. I think he did it just right. It was just kind of lower than his regular voice and a little bit kind of intimidating. Pattinson also looks like a billionaire. That's just his look. So he'll be able to pull off those Bruce Wayne sequences pretty well. And we got quite a bit of Bruce in the trailer. I thought he looked great. I mean, he looked very, top 1% type dude. Like I said, though, my one issue is he's a little too skinny. And he did address this in a GQ article, saying he intentionally wasn't packing on the muscle and was going for more of a James Dean type of look. And this is early in Batman's career, so that kind of makes sense. Maybe he hasn't gotten jacked yet. We'll see, though.
You know, Cody, in the NFL, when there's a football player who's like really strong, but he doesn't really look the part, they call him wiry. So I think that Robert Pattinson is a wiry Batman. So from the trailer, it looks like Riddler is the main villain, which is cool. But, is this Riddler going to be able to match Jim Carrey's performance in Batman Forever?
Academy Award-winning performance, yeah. You forgot to say.
Yeah. Just kidding. But I still want to see them establish the Riddler as an original character instead of completely derived from a recent Joker performance.
Well, we have Paul Dano in the role, playing the Riddler, and he's an incredible actor. He's from, There Will Be Blood. He's in Prisoners. He's in a lot of good movies. So I think his performance will be top-notch.
Yeah, he's talented for sure. Fingers crossed he doesn't overact too much, like when he played the preacher in There Will Be Blood. But, asking Paul Dano not to overact is kind of like asking you, Cody, to recommend a movie that wasn't made before Antarctica was fully mapped out.
Yeah, it seems like they're making the Riddler like more of a serial killer instead of a hammy comedian, kind of like the Joker. So that should be interesting. I mean, we'll see what he does with it.
Yeah, Paul Dano really does have the serial killer vibe about him.
And going along with the detective theme, I think challenging Batman's mind more than his body is the right way to go, especially since, we're talking about Robert Pattinson being thinner build. Him to rely on his mind, use his detective skills to solve problems. I think that's a good way to go with a film like this.
Yeah, and speaking of other characters besides Batman, I didn't see them in the trailer, but it looks like this Batman will also feature not only the Riddler, but Catwoman and Penguin as well.
They were in there.
Yeah.
Just quick little cuts.
Okay. They're definitely on IMDb, but anyways, I feel like having multiple big characters and villains like this is easy to mess up. Sure, Marvel can do it, but they also have 20 movies including origin stories to establish all these different characters. I'm not sure if this Batman will have sequels in the same universe, but I'm a little scared that having this many major characters will be a mess. Kind of like how the third Tobey Maguire Spider-Man had the Sandman and Venom, and it didn't work at all.
Well, the number of villains isn't necessarily what ruined that movie. I think it was clear that was a lost cause once the emo dance scene started. But, it isn't clear if they're all even villains in this movie. Or are they just characters in the universe at this point? Maybe Batman has to work with an arms dealer, named Penguin to get to the Riddler. And Catwoman has always sort of walked the line between hero and villain, if you remember from the Nolan films. She wasn't really a bad guy at all. She was like helping Batman throughout.
Yeah, that's a decent point. But, I mean, even The Dark Knight Rises couldn't do it. There was Bane with the weird voice. Let the games begin! And then there was, like you said, Catwoman. I think she was just kind of tossed in there without much significance. She helped Batman at one point, but besides that, it just seemed like, we want to have Catwoman in this movie.
Almost all the Batman films do this. In Batman Begins, it was Ra's al Ghul and the Scarecrow, along with Carmine Falcone, the mob boss. And then in The Dark Knight, it was both Joker and Two-Face. In fact, the only Batman film that didn't have more than one villain was Tim Burton's first film, Batman, and that just had the Joker in it.
Speaking of the Joker, I have Joker fatigue, and it was nice not to see him in a Batman movie for once.
You have Joker fatigue? I don't. I'll take the Joker in every single Batman story ever. To me, he's the perfect anti-Batman. Even if he's not a central character, his presence is always appreciated. But, with the Joker, it's hard to have him not be front and center. Suicide Squad tried to do that. They tried to keep him in the background. And everybody just wanted to see more Joker.
So you're saying that after seeing Jared Leto's performance as Joker, you want more Joker after that?
I wanted more of the character. We'll put it that way.
Okay, let's switch to another character. I think this is a chance to finally have a good live-action Catwoman. Halle Berry's movie kind of killed the character for a little bit, along with her career. And like I mentioned before, the Christopher Nolan Catwoman seemed like an afterthought. I like Zoe Kravitz, who's playing Catwoman in this new one. I liked her in Pretty Little Liars, so hopefully her character is good in The Batman.
I thought Michelle Pfeiffer did a pretty good job in Batman Returns. And I didn't mind Anne Hathaway's Selena Kyle. I think it fit with what Nolan was going for in those films, like a more grounded, earnest take on a comic book movie. And it's hard to do Catwoman like that. And I think, if you're gonna do Catwoman in the Nolan verse, then that's how you do it.
I think one of the important things about Catwoman is maybe you need to establish her as a good guy or a bad guy. I had to Google her. I Googled, is Catwoman a villain or a good guy? And then I had to kind of search, and then it's like, oh, Catwoman's accepted as a bad guy. I feel like she's got to be one or the other to really, earn a spot as a good character, but we'll see. Okay, but moving on from the Batman characters, one of the coolest things about Batman is the Batmobile, and I gotta say, this Batmobile looks pretty rad.
It does look kind of cool for a car. My one concern is that it looks very vintage. Like, you don't need to be a billionaire to have that car. It's kind of like a classic car converted into Batmobile style. And I personally like when Batman uses high-tech equipment. Best, the most futuristic, cool looking stuff. And this looks cool, but again, like in a James Dean type of way. So it might work in the film. Like I said, we'll wait until we see it, but I'm hoping it doesn't go too vintage.
I think it's, once again, like not having the Joker. I think this new Batmobile is refreshing. Like, if you go back and look at Christopher Nolan's Batmobile, it's almost like laughable how over the top it is, how much of like a tank it is. But yeah, it's cool, but I'm excited to see a new one. But, only time will tell how this Batman turns out, but it's safe to say that me and you, Cody, we both approve of this trailer. But is it safe to say that we both approved of Christopher Nolan's latest movie?
Well, and again, we're continuing with the Robert Pattinson theme. We did see Tenet. We talked about how we were in the movie theater earlier. The film that we saw, the first film coming back from quarantine, was Christopher Nolan's Tenet. We've talked about it a few times on the podcast. We've finally seen it. And we not only saw it once, we saw it twice, which we will get into why in a second. But first, if you're a little wary, you're like, wait, I want to see it before I hear anything about it. I don't think you'll have to worry. We've checked and double-checked our notes to make sure that there aren't any spoilers. And I guess a good discussion point is, can this movie be spoiled? There's so much going on, you kind of need to see it twice. I don't really know if it's possible for us to spoil it. And my first time in the theater, I was begging for spoilers. I was like, can somebody explain to me what is going on? We will not do that here. We're not going to talk about anything in the movie that isn't made obviously apparent in the trailers, but we are going to talk a little bit about whether we liked it and some of the kind of craft of the movie making process behind it. So what is it about? Again, it would be tough to explain, but we can say a government agent is pulled into a secret mission to save the world.
All I have for you is a word. Tenet. Use it carefully.
I need some idea of the threat we face.
We're trying to prevent World War III.
I'm not saying Armageddon here.
No. Something worse.
Yeah, but we can say that this is a Christopher Nolan movie where Chris goes full Nolan. Like Inception, you need to learn a new concept, which handsome characters and expensive suits use to save the day. And it's filled with, wait, I didn't get how that worked moments. Tons of those.
So let's start with what we liked. I thought it was overall well worth the price of admission. You're going to see things in the movie theater that you've never seen before. And I feel like also this is Christopher Nolan's most ambitious movie to date, at least story-wise. He loves his complex narratives, and this is certainly that. Is it too far? I think critics will debate that question for years. I personally don't think so, though. What I like about Christopher Nolan is he doesn't treat his audience like an idiot. Like a lot of films do, where they over-explain everything. He assumes that you're smart enough to get it eventually if you just hang in there.
Yeah, I'm going to contradict myself later in this review, but those Chris Nolan moments where the complexity starts to fall into place, those are pretty satisfying.
They are. But let's back up a little bit. Some of the things, artistically that we liked about it. The cinematography, I think, is on point. It's done by Hoyt van Hoytema, who also did Dunkirk, Interstellar, and the movie Her. And his stuff always looks great. I think this might be Nolan's best looking film. At a minimum, I would say it looks as good as anything he's ever done. And Hoyt van Hoytema has been the cinematographer for Nolan's kind of second act of his career. He took over from Wally Pfister, who did the movies, from The Dark Knight and Inception days. And Pfister moved on to be a director, so Nolan had to find himself a new cinematographer. And I think Hoyt van Hoytema is a step up overall, personally. He really embraces that IMAX spectacle, epicness that Nolan is going for.
Yeah, Christopher Nolan and this guy Hoyt, they do a really good job of making things feel huge. There's the opera house from the trailer. There's a scene of a speedboat cruising under massive wind turbines. There's a line of diesel trucks just roaring down a highway. These are moments that made me feel glad to be back in the cinema.
I think that's a good way of putting it. I kind of mocked Nolan a little bit for saying this movie needs to be seen in theaters. But it's pretty cool seeing it in theaters. Nolan has said that Tenet is his take on a Bond film. And it does have some of those tropes, kind of once you know that. We have a Bond girl who's involved with the villain and our secret agent. There's an eccentric, wealthy villain with unique motives. We won't get into what they are. And of course, John David Washington is a Bond-like character. And this is maybe the only time we'll see a black Bond for a while.
Yeah, it's very Bond-esque. There's a bunch of foreign locations with big bosses on top of skyscrapers. One thing I really liked, instead of the typical, Moscow, Shanghai, Paris locations you would see in Bond movies and even Mission Impossible movies, Nolan mixes it up a little with this one. We get Mumbai, we get Estonia, we get the Ukraine. I like seeing all those new locations.
And it doesn't necessarily feel like specific locations. They kind of the way he shoots it and the way it's presented, it feels like sort of generic India, generic Eastern Europe. It almost could take place anywhere in those regions. And I thought that was cool. I love when movies do that. But let's talk a little bit about our Bond. So John David Washington. He is the clear star of the film, and not just because he gives a good standout performance. The entire movie is really about him and his character. The name of the character is literally the protagonist, and we see the movie through his point of view. The trailers kind of make it seem like he and Pattinson are the stars of this movie, but really this is John David Washington's movie. And this is the first ever Nolan film with a lead who's a person of color, unless you count Morgan Freeman in the Dark Knight trilogy, which I don't. John David Washington, from the first frame, he's a bad dude. He looks cool. Like, just sitting there, you're like, okay, this guy means business. Like, he's about to kick some butt, and he does throughout the movie. I think his acting style is kind of like his dad's, but as Zach said when we walked out of the theater, he just doesn't give as many speeches. So I think you could say maybe a little more understated than Denzel.
Yeah, John David Washington is my boy. I mentioned in a previous episode, I think he's one of the best millennial actors. His character in Tenet was a boss for sure, but at the same time, I feel like he was a little basic. He had, he could beat people up and he had a few one-liner jokes, but he just kind of there wasn't much to him to me in Tenet. I think maybe the problem is he was just too good in BlacKkKlansman, and I was bound to be disappointed in whatever character he played next.
That's true. There wasn't much range for him to show in this film. And we'll get to what we didn't like in a bit, but there's a ton of exposition in this film. And sometimes rattling all that off, he comes off as slightly wooden. But he has great moments too. So the only thing negative I think I would say about his performance is that it can be inconsistent at times. Starring alongside of John David Washington was the actress Elizabeth Debicki. What did you think of her?
Yeah, Elizabeth is also known as the really tall woman from the trailer. I haven't seen this actress before, but I feel like Nolan thought, maybe we need a real human as a character, and she filled that role. In a world of kind of stiff personalities, she was the only one really it seemed to have any emotional reaction to anything.
I think she was in a Jack Reacher movie, but this is her first really memorable role. Not to, hate on that performance, but I think you're right. In this, she's very human. She does a good job. And it also must be said, we are contractually obligated to mention that she's a nice-looking lady, too. Speaking of nice-looking, let's get into him. Our boy, Robert Pattinson. He was not in the film as much as I expected. Like I said, this isn't really his movie. But he puts in a good performance, and of course he's charismatic when he's on screen. I would describe his contribution as like an excellent side character, but not really showing off his range in any way. You don't see the Lighthouse Robert Pattinson or the Good Time Robert Pattinson. And if you're expecting a ton of Pattinson, you do get it in terms of screen time, but nowhere near as much as we'll get in Batman.
Yeah, I think Pattinson was his great subtle self. Pattinson's not going to overpower you, like a Matthew McConaughey or a Leo, but I feel like in a movie like Good Time, and especially in this Tenet, he just feels like real and interesting at the same time.
Other things that we liked, despite being very complex plot-wise, it's nice to know that Nolan kind of did all the math. You're in good hands. My advice, if you go see this, would be don't get frustrated on the first watch. Just take it all in. Don't worry. It will all make sense in your second watch.
Well, he did. Everything makes sense, and I do agree with the sentiment that we are in good hands, and there's not going to be plot holes or mistakes to really totally mislead you. But we'll get into how I feel about that later, though.
Ooh, when we get into what we don't like.
Exactly.
All right, so maybe we can agree on this, the music. It wasn't Hans Zimmer. He was off scoring Denis Villeneuve's Dune, which we did get a trailer for. We'll probably discuss that in a forthcoming podcast. But the Black Panther composer, Ludwig Göransson, if that's how you pronounce it, I think he turned in a good Zimmer-like soundtrack nonetheless. I don't think Zimmer would have done anything too radically different from what we got.
Yeah, this soundtrack for Tenet is much more in your face than the typical ominous, slow-building Hans Zimmer style. Nolan moves away from, thankfully he moves away from his signature deep horn bass, and he shifts into a more like cutting electronic feel with Tenet.
Yeah, I thought it worked pretty well. Some things that didn't work. Let's talk about what we don't like about the movie. I'm sure Zach will second me on this. It's a frustrating movie to watch the first time. It seems like Nolan wrote a climax, or a final destination, and then he worked backwards to fill in kind of the first and second act.
Yeah, that's one way of putting it. But I think honestly, for first watch, it's almost insulting how in the dark you are. It's just a Ferrari engine of events, locations, and inaudible dialogue, all while trying to wrap your head around the concept of Tenet. I honestly think that without the Tenet concept that you'll learn about, the movie would still be overly complicated.
Like I said, you need to see it twice to get the full experience. When I saw it the first time, I maybe understood 55% of what was going on. When I saw it the second time, though, I feel like I totally understand, 98% of what was going on. Some movies, watching them a second time, you see so much more and there are all these layers. In this case, I think that second watch is pretty much required, which is novel, but I feel like that's asking a lot of our regular movie-going audience.
Yeah, don't forget, though, in between those first and second watches, there's also like 30 YouTube explanation videos that I watched to help me understand. And, sometimes I think that the purpose of Tenet was just to have a bunch of YouTube videos explaining it. I haven't ruled out that, the accountants were just like, hey, what if we got people to buy two tickets, so they could understand this movie? Maybe it was just a financial strategy. Worked on me. Sometimes a confusing first watch is fine. Like some Stanley Kubrick movies, everything is right in front of you, but it just feels weird. Then the next day you find yourself thinking about it, and then you get the urge to watch it again with a whole new appreciation. That's not the case with Tenet. With Tenet, the first watch isn't fun because you need more information, more context, and a chance to really register the dialogue in order to appreciate anything that's happening. To me, the first watch of Tenet feels like you're in math class, being tested on long division with decimals. But before that, the teacher has only taught you addition and subtraction. It's like, I don't have enough here to be able to figure out what's going on.
I think that's a pretty good metaphor. It's frustrating, but my advice would be don't get frustrated. By the end, you'll understand a lot of it. And then on your second watch, you'll get it all. So don't worry. Another thing I didn't like about Tenet is there's just too much darn exposition. There'll be an 8-minute conversation telling the viewer everything they need to know in order to, again, halfway understand a 2-minute sequence. It's kind of appreciated in the first watch because you're so lost. And, somehow Nolan still keeps the fast pace going throughout these exposition scenes. But man, is there a ton of exposition. The old show don't tell thing is a thing for a reason, is what I would say to Christopher Nolan.
I second that too. Another thing about Tenet, there's all the comparisons to Inception. Oh, is this in the same universe as Inception? Is it a sequel to Inception? Are these just borrowed ideas or leftover ideas from Inception? Was Tenet, Cody, do you think Tenet was just a B-side Inception movie?
No, because I personally think that it's better than Inception as just a piece of cinema. Inception was more approachable, for sure, but it does have some cringe moments and a lot of things that don't even make sense after 10 watches. I think the pacing is better in Tenet. It ticks along very quickly, and you're never bored. It's 2.5 hours long, and you don't ever get bored. The pacing is on point. And I think the story is a little more emotional and goes less for like that, oh, it's so epic feel.
Yeah, that's probably true. This is, it's too busy. It's too busy giving exposition to really do much else. So that's kind of bound to happen. But yeah, I think that Tenet makes Inception seem super straightforward. I rewatched Inception recently. It almost felt as lifeless as Dunkirk.
Here we go.
But one thing I will say about Tenet is the overall world compared to Dunkirk and Inception. I feel like the whole world is a little more fleshed out, and so I will give it that. But Cody, overall, we've talked about everything about Tenet. So what are your overall thoughts?
Despite being less approachable than any of his earlier work, I think Christopher Nolan broke new cinematic ground with this one. And I'm going to average my first and second viewing scores and settle on an 8 out of 10. But, if I watch it a third time, I might have to average those three, and it could go up to an 8.5. We'll see.
Okay. Okay, for me, I give Tenet a 9 out of 10. If I was rating it as a jigsaw puzzle. But I'm not. It's a movie. It's definitely a unique and fresh take on action. I'll give it that. I've rewound video before. I've seen some of the stuff, but it was pretty cool. But I gotta take points off for that slap in the face of a first watch. I give it a 6 out of 10.
Wow, that is a surprising score for a movie this good. But I understand. It is frustrating, like we said. We'll see if I can do any better in my recommendation segment. Zach, do you want to explain to the folks at home how recommendations work? And then I have a little bit of a spoiler warning.
All right, so the recommendation part of the episode, very simple. I recommend a movie for Cody to watch. He recommends a movie for me to watch. Sometimes these are old movies, sometimes they're newer, but they're movies, to make sure, like, hey, I wonder if Cody's seen this, Cody will be like, oh, I want to try to expose Zach's bad taste by recommending a movie. That's the kind of thing that happens in this part of the part of the podcast.
You nailed it. Exactly right. Yep.
Yeah. So last episode, Cody recommended I watch the Alfred Hitchcock movie Vertigo.
And before I get started on describing anything about Vertigo, a quick spoiler warning. It's best to go into this film completely blind. So if you listen to us discuss anything about it, it's kind of going to ruin it for you. So if you ever intend to watch Vertigo, it's a classic 1958 Alfred Hitchcock film, one of my favorites of all time, then stop the podcast now. You've listened to enough for us to get these analytics going. Go watch Vertigo and come back. So that being said, here's your last chance. We are going to discuss it. It's best if you go in completely blind, but if you don't care, I'm never going to watch it, or I don't want that experience, proceed with caution. So Vertigo is a 1958 American film noir psychological thriller directed by the great Alfred Hitchcock. And I recommended it to you because it's one of my favorite movies ever made. And I think it's a good example of an older film, it was made in 1958, that still holds up today and is really, really good and doesn't suffer from some of the problems that older movies have. It stars Jimmy Stewart as a retired police detective who has vertigo, the condition, and he is called upon by his friend to help him investigate a condition that his wife has. And that's what I'll say for now. Zach, what did you think of Vertigo?
All right. This is going to be a mostly positive review, I got to say. It's almost going to sound like I'm selling the movie. Vertigo is one of those movies where every single shot is like over the top, thought out, and perfect, but still feels effortless at the same time. Cody, in the last podcast, you mentioned the use of color. I guess Vertigo is Technicolor. I don't know what that means, but I just know it looked really good. There's a restaurant in Vertigo that the characters go to called Ernie's, and the walls of the restaurant are like a deep red velvet color, and it just like glows warmly, and you just kind of feel like you're in a dream world. I can't really, if somebody told that to me, like I would be like, whatever, but it's kind of crazy when you're watching that scene. There's amazing grand shots of cathedrals, but even the shots like in offices and, smaller living rooms are amazing. Like the detail and arrangement and color patterns of everything just have me thinking like, wow, they really put a lot of effort and thought into this movie. But beyond the visuals, I always appreciate just weirdness in a movie. And the vibe of this whole movie is just absolutely strange. The intro credits, they seem kind of cheesy for a second. And then before you know it, you're just kind of hypnotized. The main character was interesting. I guess the actor, like you mentioned, Jimmy Stewart, I guess he was a Hollywood legend. I had only seen him in It's a Wonderful Life. He wasn't one of those characters you want to get behind and support blindly. He was more of an obsessive freak that you couldn't take your eyes off of.
Judy, it can't make that much difference to you. I just want to see what
No, I don't want any clothes. I don't want anything. I want to get out of here.
Judy, do this for me.
He was relatable, but not in a I went through that too kind of way. But more relatable as he kind of takes those dark, impulsive thoughts one can have, and he goes with them at 100 miles per hour with no inhibitions. And it gets super uncomfortable. This movie was made 62 years ago, but for, I'd say 98% of the time, it doesn't feel that way. It doesn't feel that old. It feels new, honestly, to me. But the only moments where it was kind of aged looking is when it showed like there was characters falling and it kind of had a cheesy, slow spinning body effect. But besides that, you wouldn't have known that it was made 70 years ago. Bottom line, it's just a constant feeling of unease, terror, and fascination. And I know, like, Cody, you're gonna freak out, but I'm gonna give Vertigo a 9 out of 10. So just make a big deal about it, get it over with. That's fine.
Take my victory lap and then move on. No, I'm super glad you enjoyed it. Because I love it so much, and so it's cool that you were into it. In fact, when you texted me after you saw it, I was a little confused, but then you said, well, I'll put it this way. I had to pee when it first started, and I still had to pee when it ended. So you basically held your attention the whole time. And so I was like, all right, then he gets what's up. I also just love this movie. I could talk about it forever, but it's your review, so I won't. One thing I will ask you about is when this movie came out, it was not very well liked by critics. They said that, Jimmy Stewart's a little too old, and they didn't really get any of the kind of nuance behind it. I think it was one of those movies that was before its time. But since then, critics have really completely done a 180. I mean, they love this one. And part of the reason is because it is Hitchcock's take on the Hollywood actress. So Jimmy Stewart falls in love with a woman who has basically never existed, right? Almost like Marilyn Monroe. When you see her out of her makeup and her blonde hair and she just looks like a regular person, the men didn't fall in love with her as much as they did with her on-screen persona. So what did you think of that aspect of it?
Yeah, this is a concept that I had never really thought about, but it's totally true. Like, for me, I see Rey, I see Daisy Ridley in Star Wars, and I'm like, I would marry her instantly. But maybe if I met her in real life and she, like, I don't know, she had some weird habits, like burped or something when she was talking, like, I would want her to be the Rey from Star Wars that I knew, So it's one of those concepts that's like always there, but I've never seen it articulated like Vertigo showed it.
It was interesting. He falls in love with what's basically a dead woman. And so that's part of what's so creepy about it.
Yeah, it's definitely a dark, weird movie. You're not going to see the plot of the next Pixar movie, mimicking Vertigo. It's definitely a weird one, but I got to say that I was intrigued by Vertigo, and also one of our podcast listeners is obsessed with Hitchcock movies like you, Cody. He says that Hitchcock is the best director ever. I respect this listener's opinions. He was the one who recommended Tampopo. So, after watching Vertigo, I was intrigued, and I figured, I might as well check out some Hitchcock filmography a bit. After I watched Vertigo, I watched the classic North by Northwest, lived up to the hype. Rear Window, amazing movie. Rope and 39 Steps, and all of these were good. I think Hitchcock has like 75 movies or something.
Yeah.
But there's 2 more I still need to watch. I still need to watch The Birds and Psycho.
Shadow of a Doubt's worth a watch too, if you get a chance. I think that's a good indication of, how good this movie is it really makes you want to go back and watch through his filmography. I watched Family Plot after rewatching this lately, and it's not as good, but it was fun watching it and, comparing the two. This is another film kind of like Sicario that I show people when they're like, I don't really like old movies. I'm like, well, buckle up because I got one for you. But no, again, I'm glad you liked it. I'm not going to gloat. I will just take it and move on. So, Zach, you recommended that I watch Old Boy. Can you tell us about that one?
All right. So, Old Boy, I've been watching a bunch of Korean movies lately. Seen a lot that I liked, but Old Boy is still my favorite movie to come out of Korea. South Korea. I don't know if North Korea has movies, but I think they have some propaganda movies. Anyways, Old Boy, it's just your typical disgusting, dark thriller with mind-blowing twists. that we won't give away. But basically, you're following this alcoholic's life, and he's in and out of jail, and he's kind of getting used, but you don't really know why. And you just sort of follow his adventure, and it's just a greasy, gross experience the whole time. Cody, what did you think of Old Boy?
I liked it. It was originally based on a Japanese manga, and you can tell by some of the dialogue and shot composition that it comes, it feels like a comic book. I was never bored watching it because it pulls you in with its terrifying premise from the get-go. It opens with a dude who's basically imprisoned for 15 years in a creepy looking room with nothing but a television and basic amenities. I've mentioned before that I love movies that are brave enough to mostly take place in a single location, and at first I thought it was going to be one of those, so I got excited, but it isn't. So eventually the main character is let out, but that's where the story starts to get wild and almost kind of surreal. I like the characters too. The main character is great. You feel his pain and you sort of empathize with him because of the trauma that he had to go through with this, long imprisonment. He doesn't really know why. But you're also conflicted because you're turned off by the monster that he's become. At one point, he attempts to, take advantage of a sushi chef girl. She's like kind of a secondary character, and it's totally not consensual. And we're horrified by these actions. And yet we understand that he's been locked away for 15 years and just kind of craves the touch of another human. So it really makes you conflicted about this character. You root for him, but you're also kind of disgusted by his actions. Another main character who I spoke about a second ago, the sushi chef girl, she's pretty great too, because right away she just seems kind and empathetic. You just like her right off the bat. It's later explained why that's the case. And of course, there's much more to the story, which brings me to our main villain, who's great too. He's kind of eccentric, crazy, over the top, almost like a Bond villain in a way. He has endless resources and a mysterious, revenge motive. He literally lives to make the main character's life a living hell, and that's pretty freaky because he'll do anything. Part of what makes the movie so good is all these characters' lives are connected in a really interesting way. I mean, you couldn't swap out one character for a generic character, and I really like that. You see movies sometimes where there's a character whose job is to just give exposition or is just to be the comic relief or something like that. But for this movie, all of them need to be there for this story to work, and I think it's really well thought out and well executed. There are some beautiful shots and cinematography. There's a elevator sequence that comes to mind as one of my favorites. And just the whole ending at kind of the villain's compound, I thought was shot really well and looked cinematic. It was fun to watch. And then also the twist at the end is both shocking, but yet in retrospect, it makes total sense. I thought it was well executed and it didn't really cheat in any way like a bad twist will do. So what I didn't like, some of the acting and visuals were a bit over the top. Like I mentioned, it was originally a manga, and I think that they were trying to stick closely to the source material. I'll say it never went completely over the line, but it did border on being silly on occasion. Kind of my same criticism of Tampopo in that way. Like some of the stuff's just like, okay, come on. And maybe that's just because I'm a, American burger muncher, but... So overall, I really enjoyed it, though. Again, some of the surreal elements and the over-the-top acting took me out of it. But I would like to see sort of a more naturalistic treatment of this material. That being said, I enjoyed it. I mean, I had fun the whole time. I was interested, and it was executed really well. So I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10.
All right. So 8 out of 10. I approve of that. It's not a 9 out of 10, but that's okay. Yeah, I agree with your analysis. Yeah, I thought Old Boy was just crazy, mind-blowing. But my message would be, I know there's people, Parasite came out, and so everybody saw that, and they're like, oh, I totally understand Korean film culture. Okay, yeah, if you've seen Parasite, if you've seen Train to Busan, good for you. you can't understand Korean movies until you see Old Boy.
I liked it better than Parasite, actually. I thought it was a better movie in general, but
Way better.
all right, for the next episode, we always got mad love for our boy Denis Villeneuve, director of classics like Prisoners, Sicario, Arrival, Blade Runner 2049, and the new Dune trailer looks great. I'm going to have you watch an early entry into his filmography. And this actually reminds me quite a bit of Old Boy, so if you liked it, I think you will like this. You guessed it, folks, the 2010 Canadian war film Incendie. So it's in French, so you have to read some subtitles, but it's really, really good. The only thing I'll say at this point is the title means twins in English, and it's about a family where the mom passes away and leaves a task for her twin daughter and son to complete. Sort of unfinished business. I've watched almost every movie in Denis Villeneuve's filmography, and not all of his early ones are real good, but I think this is a good early one where you can really see his style come through. So, Incendie. I hope you enjoy it.
Hey, yeah, if it helps me prepare for the new Dune trailer, yeah, sounds good to me. All right, and so for you, I was actually pretty surprised you hadn't heard of this movie, or I was surprised that you hadn't seen this movie, City of God. We all hear about the slums in Brazil, but City of God takes you to the slums of Brazil. And yeah, I was surprised you hadn't seen it, and honestly, it kind of like lowers my opinion of just your overall outlook on movies. I have this friend who's obsessed with the show The Wire, and he's, if you'll say something, he'll be like, wait, you haven't seen The Wire, nothing you says matters. And then so I guess that validates it. Honestly, that's kind of how I feel when I found out you hadn't seen City of God. That's a little bit of that. And I also think that, they say with sci-fi, if you watch a recent sci-fi movie in the last 20 years, you can always reduce it back to its Star Trek inspiration. I think with City of God, it's not a super old movie, but I think that you'll notice that just like crime movies in general have really drawn from this movie, and you'll probably see what I mean.
All right. I look forward to watching. I don't know if you had to be so sassy about kind of describing it, but no, I definitely look forward to watching it. And to the folks at home, if you get a chance, check out the movies that we talked about in this episode or the movies that we'll talk about in the next episode.
Yeah, and if you're curious about our previous episodes and whether or not we've discussed a movie, you can go to stage18podcast.com, search a movie, and then it'll tell you whether we've talked about it and in which episode we did talk about it. If we talked about the movie you searched. That's stage18podcast.com. Thanks everybody for listening. And then if you know somebody who's not having a good day and you want to cheer them up, feel free to share an episode of the Stage 18 podcast with them. That usually works in cheering someone up. Bye.